The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to this meeting of the virtual CICS user group. I'm Trevor Eddles. I'm CEO of iTechEd Limited. We're a mainframe consultancy, analysis and technical authoring organisation. We're responsible for the content on the virtual CICS website, and we produce the newsletter. And we also look after the virtual IMS user group. So here's the agenda for this meeting. As usual, most of the meeting will be taken up with a presentation. And today our guest presenter is Israel Gross. He's CEO of CICS Software, and his presentation is called Efficient Management of Online Resources Using CICS Configuration Manager. And a copy of the slides from his presentation will be on our website later today. If you missed any of our previous meetings, you can download copies of those presentations from the website, and you can listen again to the whole session. The link will be on the resources page. So the place to go is fundy.com/virtual CICS, and that'll get you to our website. Following Israel's presentation and any questions you have for him, we'll move on to the latest CICS news and the latest CICS related articles. Feedback requests is there to remind me to ask you for your feedback about this virtual meeting. Then I'll give you the dates and times for the next couple of meetings. And that's pretty much the plan for this session. I'm anticipating that we'll be running at about an hour for the meeting. Okay, so as I said, today's presentation is from Israel Gross. Israel is CEO of CICS Software, an IBM business partner that specializes in hands-on classes in CICS DB2 and MQ series. Israel's been a gold consultant for many years, and he's recently become an IBM champion. Besides consulting, he teaches various courses which he develops, and more recently, he's co-architected the CProf product, a CICS tool that captures CICS trace without running in a CICS region. That's marketed and sold by CICS Software. So, Israel, I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today. And what I'm going to do now is pass control of the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Trevor.
Well, you should have something on your screen now.
Okay, can you see my screen?
I can. I see your first slide, but it's still small.
Yeah, for some reason it's... There we go.
Oh, there we are.
Just make sure I have everything else set up. You can see that screen as well?
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Okay, well, a little bit of an update. Rocket Software has acquired both Fundy and CICS Software, so now we actually work for Rocket Software. We pretty much do the same thing we were doing before, but again, we are now part of the Rocket umbrella. This morning, I want to talk about the CICS Configuration Manager product that that IBM markets and sell. We actually write it for IBM, so we have some ideas to how the product is and the future for the product as well. So I want to talk about why the product is useful, how you can use it to edit CSD files and CSD files, including CPSM BAS repositories. So if anybody's using CPSM BAS, then you can actually use the product to manage the resources that way as well. Talk about how we do migration of changes through various different environments, go through the delegation of responsibilities. So for example, if one person makes the change, perhaps different people can migrate it through some of the different environments. We also have a facility to allow for changes across LPAR boundaries. And the idea behind the product is you can manage your CICS resource definition in an organized fashion. So it will allow for complete backout, and I'll go through the process by which we can package resource definitions and then back them out as a whole. Talk a little bit about audit compliance. Currently, the product is almost 100% in terms of audit compliance, and I'll show you the differences between what is auditable and what is not. And then you can use the product for other things as well, things like cleanup, an analysis of your CSD files. You can compare resource definitions across various different environments. And then there's a couple of specialty items with the product. You can do cold start analysis, which we also call deployment analysis, which will allow you to compare, for example, a running CICS region to a standalone CSD, so that in case you bring up a region cold, you can figure out if there are any changes to the system. And then we've added some new features to the latest product 5.4, which is the ZFS support. So we now support ZFS artifacts. That includes things like your WS bind files and WSDLs. And then, as I mentioned earlier about audit collection, we now do DFHCS dupe audit collection, and I'll talk about what remains in terms of audit collection. So, by the way, you can ask me questions anytime through the presentation. Just send a message or interrupt, and I'll be happy to answer questions. So, the management of CICS resources is being done by fewer and fewer people. This is the problem we're running into in the industry today, or at least as I see it, right? So we need to be able to make rapid resource definition changes if we're adding or removing products to our CICS environments, or we're building our own internal applications and we have programmers that need program definitions, transactions, right? CICS is a resource-driven system, and if the resources aren't defined, then you aren't able to make the changes to the system. So using CICS Configuration Manager, I'm going to show you that you can make these resource changes relatively easily, and in fact, you might even be able to delegate that responsibility to somebody else, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little later on. But you can also do some CSD cleanup. If you're like me and been running CICS for 30 or so years, you have some CSD files with a lot of old stuff that you've left over and you don't even realize that is there, and you can actually clean it up, which will improve startup. So we'll talk a little bit about how it works. But first, let me go through the architecture of the actual product. So the product, let me start with the middle box where you see it says CICS region. CICS Configuration Manager runs in a particular CICS region. So all the API that we use actually run out of a specialized CICS region. When I say specialized, it's not any different than any other CICS region other than it has CICS Configuration Manager installed. So you could choose a standalone region to install the product in, or as a lot of customers today do, they install it in the web user interface. So if you're a CICSplex SM customer, which I find it hard to believe that you wouldn't be at this point, right? All the new features coming out in CICS almost require a CICSplex SM environment. So if you don't have one, you want to think about getting one in the future. Configuration Manager will run easily in the web user interface region. Now, inside that region itself, it uses CICS Web Support for communication, and we'll talk about the left-hand side in just a second. But first, at the top, you'll notice it uses some agent code to communicate with a CMAS if you're storing your resource definitions in a data repository. So if you're one of those customers that use BAS in CICSplex SM, then theoretically you can use Configuration Manager to manage those resources. Also, I'll show you if you manage CICSplex SM resource definitions, certain types of definitions, the ones that most people use, like workload manager definitions and workload manager specifications, then you can actually manage it. And the way we do it is we talk to the agent that runs inside your CMAS to communicate and record data in the data repository. On the right-hand side, you'll notice we have a repository and we have a journal. The repository really has the records that you change within an environment. So once I show you how it works, you'll be able to see that inside this repository, we kind of record the differences that you make in CICS definitions so that we're able to know from a history from the beginning of time all the changes to every resource you make in your CICS environment. We also have a journal, right, where that information is kept on. The repository is really for for CICS Configuration Manager definitions. Now, the product itself works with your CSD file. There is no other storage that's required, right? A little later on, I'll show you there is a export file if you want to move changes across an LPAR boundary. But other than that, we don't have any other storage location other than the CSD file that's used to bring up your region anyway. At the bottom of the page, you'll notice it talks about CICS Configuration Manager Install Agent. So if you want to use the Configuration Manager to actually install resource definitions in your CICS regions, then we do it via an ISC connection to an agent running in your CICS regions, and that's just to allow you to do install. I know today most people have some methodology for doing an install inside of a CICS region, and they may not be interested in using this part of the product, but they're certainly welcome to do an install, and again, it's able to do things like discard, and it records everything inside the journal so you can see everything that was done through the Configuration Manager. Now, on the left-hand side, there are two main interfaces, the top and bottom picture. The top picture is an ISPF dialog interface, so you can go through the ISPF dialog. I'm going to probably demonstrate a little bit of that during this presentation. There is also a CICS Explorer interface, so there's a plug-in to the CICS Explorer, and you can run the Configuration Manager using the CICS Explorer as well. Now, in the center, you'll notice there's a batch command interface, and I'll talk about that a little later on. Some of the things that you might want to do, especially when you're migrating resource definitions using a package, you might want a batch job to actually do that. We'll build that batch job for you as part of the process, and you can just include that job step in whatever you use to manage your table definitions, as well as, I guess, your load modules, right? Whether it's ChangeMan or Endeavor or whatever it might be, you just need to add a job step to be able to migrate the resources at the same time. Then there's this little orange box that says use your own custom interface. And the idea behind that is this uses SOAP and XML messages communicated via TCP/IP, so it is actually relatively easy to build a custom interface for just what you might want it to do. And we have several samples that allow you to do that. Now, I'm just trying to figure out why my page is not going down. There we go. So what I'm going to do is give you some sample problem and solution pages to show you all the different things that I talked about until now. So it'll give you some examples as to how it works. Again, if you have any questions while I go through this, let me know, and I'll certainly stop and show it to you. So I don't know if this is as much of a problem today as it has been in the past, but in the past, and I guess it's true today as well, if you wanted to make changes to a particular CSD file, since they're associated with individual CICS regions, you might have to actually log on to each individual region to make those changes. You certainly would have to log on to the region to install those CICS resources, right? So theoretically, you might have some shared CSDs today, so it's not as big of a problem. Some people take one CSD and share it across, 15 different regions. So theoretically, you could still make the changes from one location, but you'd still have to log on to the individual resources, the individual regions to actually do the installation. Now, of course, the CICS region must be running, and there's no audit trail or easy back out of what you've done. So if you use the Configuration Manager, whether you use the ISPF panel interface or the CICS Explorer interface, it allows you this single point of control over your resource definitions. The CICS regions do not have to be active at the time you make the changes. You just need the CICS Configuration Manager region, which, if it is your WUI, is normally always available, to actually go in and make the changes. You have an audit trail of absolutely everything you do through the product. So when I was talking about some of the auditing that we'll see later on, that has to deal with using some other interfaces to make your resource definitions. As long as you use the configuration manager to make your resource definition changes, then we will audit it and we provide for an easy backout. Okay, so here is just a sample of one of the screens. What we're actually doing on this screen is we're going through at the top an option called Reports and Multiple Configurations. One of the things you can do with this product is you can actually select multiple configurations at a time, and then at the bottom of the screen you can actually see where we're displaying programs inside of a particular group, and on the right hand side you can see those programs exist in 3 different configurations. Now, why would you want to look at the same program across 2 or 3 different CSDs? Well, obviously it's probably for comparison purposes, and I'll show you an example of that a little later on. Yeah, Trevor, I'm just getting a delay in getting my page to switch. I'm not really sure why.
Oh, yeah, not sure at all. There we are.
Yeah, it's eventually going, but it just seems to be going a little bit slowly. So sorry for that. So one of the other problems you'll run into if you actually do anything with the CICS SM BAS repository, you might notice that IBM provided a method to extract data from a CSD and import that data using batch rep into a CICS SM repository. But they didn't provide you with any method for copying those definitions back again, right? So there isn't a seamless way to get definitions to and from BAS. Let's say you wanted to give BAS a try, and there's some advantages to BAS for certain types of items. You might want to give it a try, move it over to BAS, but then you want to move it back, and it's quite difficult to do something like that. With CICS Configuration Manager, it's the same interface. When we look at a resource definition, you could pull it up under BAS, you could pull it up under CETA, and it looks the same to you. And it's interesting because BAS does provide some user fields which show up as grayed out when you look at it in the CSD because that function's not available there. But otherwise, you would see the same resource definition in the same layout and format as you would any other way when you use CICS Configuration Manager, and you can easily copy definitions in either direction. Now, one of the things that people haven't realized is that you can also use the configuration manager to manage certain resource definitions that aren't CICS resource definitions, right? They're actually CICS SM resource definitions, but they're the ones that you probably would want to do. So if there's anyone here that's actually running configuration manager, I challenge you to go and give this a try, and I'll show you a little demonstration here. So I have my little CICS Configuration Manager primary menu here, and I can go into option 2 for CICS resource definitions. And what we always tell people when you're in this product is if you want to know what you can do, just put a slash next to something, right? So if you put a slash, you could see you can expand the res desks or lists, you can expand the groups, you can do an import of CICS resources, you can select the file for viewing. And normally I would just select the file for viewing. However, when I go over here to my CPSM repository and I put a slash, you'll notice there's 2 additional options, right? There's one for topology and there's one for workload. If you select option 6, you can see that Configuration Manager will allow you to work with CICS system definitions, CICS system groups, and a period definition, and it'll allow you to build the association between systems and groups and between groups and groups. Also, oops, went too far. You can go into option 7 there, and anything you might want to do with a workload manager specification group, definition, or a tran group, you can do as well, right? Now, the trick is, however, you need to add a repository that's known as a CPSM repository in CPSM format. That's what would give you the ability to do that, okay? So you can actually do that via the configuration manager. Let me just shut this off, sorry. Okay, so let me go down a page. So what about migrating changes between different environments? You can use the CICS Configuration Manager to migrate resource definitions between different environments. But today, how would you do it? So I've seen it done in a couple of different organizations, right? You could collect the resource definitions, you make them in development. Probably what you do today is you extract those definitions using CSDUP, and then you send the definitions to a different environment. Of course, you have to edit them first, right? So you actually have to go to the trouble of saying, well, what does the target environment look like? And maybe I need to change some of the attributes on the resource definition before I take it from the source to the target environment. Okay. Well, with Configuration Manager, we have a concept of a change package. And you've probably heard the concept before, right? But the idea behind a change package is you take the resource definitions associated with a change and you define it to a particular package. Then we have a process by which you ready the package. Once you've readied the package, you've indicated that you don't expect any other changes to occur to the resource definitions within that package. Should a change occur, it won't allow the migration until the package is re-readied or the change is back out. Now, once you've readied the package, it could optionally go through an approval process. That is to say that you could set this up so that 1 to 5 people, or 1 to 5 people within 5 different groups, need to approve this change before it's actually migrated. Once a package is fully readied and approved, it can be migrated as a whole from one environment to another. Now, if you migrate it as a whole within a change package, you can back it out as a whole, you can install it, and you can new copy it as the package. So not the individual resources, although theoretically you could also do the individual resources in the package, but it allows you to do the whole package all at one point. Now, by itself, it doesn't sound like anything interesting, right? But I'm going to show you there's something called transformation rules. See, if you actually migrate the package from the development environment to the test environment, you still have the issues where you might want to change some of the attributes as you're migrating from one environment to the other. So I'm going to get to that in just a second, but keep that in mind, yeah? Now, once a package is readied and migrated, that package can be migrated between all the different environments that you might have. So you can progressively migrate that change package through various different environments. Now, you could allow for anyone to change those resource definitions, or as you're going to see in a minute, you have the ability to automatically have the resource attributes changed that you want for the target environment that the resource will live in. Okay. Just trying to get the page to change. There we go. So before we show you that, let me just say that when you're migrating changes between various environments, you can do from any environment to any environment. The picture at the top shows you can go from one to many. So let's say in a test environment, you have a local region, everything is in that region. You got terminals in there, you got applications in there, you got files in there, everything's all in one place. But now suddenly you want to do a migration from development to test, and maybe some of the resources live in a CSD, maybe some of the resources live in a CPSM repository, right? Or perhaps you have a transaction that lives in a TOR and you need a copy of it in the AOR. There's a local copy in the AOR. There's a remote copy in the TOR. You have the same problem with files, right? Maybe you have a remote definition in the AOR and then you have an FOR that you have to install a local definition. So when you do the migration, you actually pick the destination that you're going to migrate these resources to, and you can change or add the definitions as needed. So you're going to see in just a second, you can go from one to many, You can go from many to one. You can go from one to one, right? So we support any sort of migration between the different environments. Now, what makes this exciting to me is the concept of transformation rules, right? A transformation rule is an automated fashion of changing a resource definition when you take it from one environment to another, right? So what you can do is you can build the definition in a development environment, and as in this picture shows, it could be in a CPSM data repository, or it could literally be in a CSD file, right? And then when you migrate the change, you could change pretty much any of the attributes as it reaches the target destination. So in this particular case on this page, we've chosen to change the group name that it lives in from pay development to pay test, and we've chosen to change the middle qualifier on the dataset name from dev T to test, right? And so by building these transformation rules, you're able to actually change the resource definition so that nobody has to make any changes to the resource definition when it's migrated. Okay. Now, so now you have packages. You can package resource definitions. You have transformation rules. So you're probably starting to see the picture that if you set this all up correctly, then nobody needs to touch that resource definition after it leaves the primary or the initial environment. Let's call it development for now, right? I know everybody has a different name for their environments. So I can't say what you guys might actually name your environments. So in that particular case, you can actually delegate the responsibilities. And in this picture, we're saying that when it comes to the administration of CICS resource definitions, you might have different people that can do various parts of this. Plus, you get to document some of the institutional knowledge. They used to call it tribal knowledge, right, with the product. So, for example, right, development, you can actually allow application developers to make their own changes in development. Now, every time I have this conversation with customers, they always like freak out a little bit because they're going, whoa, nobody does CICS resource definitions but the CICS system group. But I can show you an example of where I've set this up in various different environments that you can actually build what I like to call a shadow or a fake CSD. Right? So you build a CSD that isn't attached to any CICS region. How hard is that to do? Well, let's see. It's an idcams, delete, define, and then an initialize as a CSD, and you give them an empty CSD, or better yet, give them a copy of the development CSD. And then what you do is you have the application developer make changes in this development CSD that's not attached to any region. And when they're done making those changes, and by the way, I'm going to show you, you can enforce site standards. So you can ensure that number one, they only change the resource definitions that you want them to change. So let's say, for example, transactions, programs, and files. I'm just making it up. You could give them anything you want them to do, and you could eliminate anything you don't want them to do. And I'm going to show you how that's done in just a second. And so let's say you limit them to just those 3 resource definitions, but then you're concerned as well because inside some of those resource definitions, especially transactions and files, there's a lot of options on the different attributes. So you want to limit the attributes that they can actually modify. So let's just say we could do all of this. What would be the harm of letting a developer create a definition in an environment that's not attached to a CICS region? So my answer is I don't see any harm at all. And then what they could do is they could package those resource definitions into a change package, and you can even set up the environment so that once they've packaged it and they've readied that package, suddenly you, the systems programmer, gets an email. There's a package ready for migration from the shadow CSD, which is a term we like to use, to the real CSD in development. Do you approve it? Do you not approve it? And if you don't approve it, they can't migrate those changes. And if you do approve it, all they get to do is migrate those changes from the shadow CSD to development. So there's an example of where all you have to do is click one button to decide whether or not to approve it or not. Now, yes, perhaps you want to go through the resources that are actually defining, right? But if you do go through the resources and you're happy with it, you allow the migration to go through. Once it's already been migrated, then theoretically, if you want the changes migrated to test, you can let a junior CICS admin person do the migration from development to test, and maybe more of a senior person to look at the changes before they're migrated from test to production. So with standards enforcement, as mentioned here, and with the approval process, I don't see the harm in letting developers actually make their own resource definitions in a shadow type CSD environment. Again, everything you do has an audit trail with an easy back out. So it makes it relatively simple if something goes wrong to back it out very quickly. So here's an example of a particular screen. And this is going to be an example of a site standard. And I kind of want to show you a little bit about this. So I'm probably going to do a little live demo in just a second. But what this picture is depicting is it's pulling up a particular definition screen. So you can actually see on the screen itself, it shows you the default values. So you can see the column labeled as default and the alternative values. And the user has chosen to make CEDF no, which violates the standards, and then he's going to hit save. And he'll get a message that looks like this. It says, update of this resource was rejected by a site standard. There's the rule. And you can actually see the rule example at the bottom. So it says attribute CDF must have a value of yes. And at the bottom of the page, you can see the way our sample site standards exit works. You can build your own if you want. You can modify ours. And you can see right in here where it says, if the program definition group is demo group 1, and if the program definition name equals a mask, i.e. it starts with DEMA, and the CEDF status is not equal to yes, you can reject it. We also have the ability to override it, but I find that a little irritating because they'll make it no and type in save and then go back in and it says yes, and they'll start scratching their head as to figure out why it changed. But you have that option. You can do reject, or you can do override. So just to show you as an example, this is the actual environment where these screen prints were taken from. So if I go into the development environment, I just want to show you on the top line, I can put in different filters. I can filter by name, I can filter by type, and I can filter by CICS resource group. So it's almost like a CETA expand, group, and I can put in a name for prog, and I open paren and give it a name. So that's what we're kind of mimicking over here. So if I were to look at all the programs in demo group 1 and I hit enter, I get a list of 15 programs on the screen. If I select the first one, you'll see that my screen doesn't show you the values and the alternate values. If you hit PF11, that's the screen that you were looking at. And there's 3 choices here. The first one that we just did gave you a description of the field. This page actually shows you default and alternative. And then we have the system program review, which shows you nothing, right? Because we already know everything, right? So nonetheless, you choose how you want the screen to appear, and it will remember that. So I can actually do a locate for C. It'll move my cursor down to CEDF. I can type in no, or do you see the little plus there? There's a plus next to this field, which means I can hit PF4 and have it prompted. So that's how even a programmer that doesn't know much about CICS resource definitions could easily make that change. And if I just hit PF3, which I have my save set on, you could see this was rejected because of the site standard. So I'm just going to cancel this out for just a second. Now, what I would like to do is, since I'm in here already, is actually show you another demonstration. Select something else in here, and I'm going to change something I can change. So let's see, data location, I'm going to make it below. Okay, I'm going to hit PF3, and it's saved. Now what I want to show you is if you put a slash next to any of the resource definitions, there's a lot of options here, right? So there's lots of stuff you can do, and you can see through some of it. But what I actually like here is H for history. I want to show you that I can actually get a history of everything that's happened to this resource definition from the beginning of time. Now, you could see the beginning of time for me was 4/26/2018. This is our demo system, so that's probably the last time somebody initialized it. And you could see it starts with an ID of unknown because obviously you have existing resource definitions. And if you don't define the initial copy through the product, we don't know who made the initial resource definition. But after the initial resource definition, we have the user ID of anyone who's made the change. Now, what I would like to know is I would like to know what the difference is. So I'm jumping ahead a little bit to the presentation, but I'd like to know what the difference is between the copy I just modified and its original. So I can do a CM and a CM right next to it, and it'll do a side-by-side comparison. So I can see that when this program definition was made was 4/26, it had the language of COBOL, and somebody, namely me earlier today, changed the language to assembler. So you could see highlighted any differences between the two resource definitions. You could also see the last change release down at the bottom was at CICS 5.4 versus CICS 5.3. And actually, this is the user ID associated with the change that was made. Obviously, it was done through the batch environment, so I don't have that resource definition, the user ID in there. But what I can also do is go and compare what I just did. And you can see that I changed data location from below to any. Now, since I've been mucking around with this definition, I'm going to select the original copy for now. I'm going to do a save. I'm going to hit PF3. Now there should be 4 lines. And you can see I've restored the original source from the beginning of time, right? Now, that just says you go to any resource definition, put an H next to it, and you can see a history of every change to that resource definition, okay? So one of the other things we wanted to show you here is if you follow my suggestion and let programmers make resource definitions, the first thing everybody's going to worry about is, oh my gosh, I don't want them to make resource definitions like URI maps or some of the other ones. Well, you can protect it because this product is fully RACF protectable. What you can see right here is a user trying to save a copy of a particular program. We have the option called Save As, and he's gone in there and he's tried to save a copy of what looks to be a program definition with a name called democopy in a group called payroll in a different configuration. And at the bottom of the page, you can see that there's a RACF definition that says permit CCV demo CPSM payroll progdef asterisk, and down at the bottom it has an ID of RJA2 with an access of none. Right? And it'll just say you're not authorized to perform the requested function. So if they do attempt to change a resource that you haven't given them the access to do, you can provide it, you can provide security via RACF, right? So now you can protect individual attributes via site standard. You can actually protect the resource definitions via RACF, and so you can imagine you could limit what a user can actually do in terms of table definitions all the way down to the attribute level and the types of definitions that they can change. So what about changes across an LPAR boundary, right? You probably have this issue today as well, but you probably do something quite a bit different than we do. Theoretically today, if you had a change across an LPAR boundary, maybe you had a group of definitions, you'd have to extract it from the CSD, which would automatically put it into a flat file in CSDUP format, and then you'd have to FTP or NDM that particular file over to the other site, and then you'd have to run a DFH CSD to do the update, right? Well, we have the ability to do resource definitions or the exporting of resource definitions using something called an export file. And effectively what you do is you can migrate resource definitions to an export file. You can use a plain old DFHCSDUP export file, or you can use one of our own CICS Configuration Manager export files. The difference between the two is a CSDUP export file is just going to be in CSDUP format the way you know it today. If you use a CICS Configuration Manager export file, it means that the package will go along with that particular data that you're exporting, right? And so when you get to the other side, you can import by package. You can also import by individual resources by copying them to a particular CSD across the LPAR boundary. Now, again, you could automatically register the change package because this might not be the ultimate destination. Perhaps you have many different LPARs with no shared DASD. By the way, if you have shared DASD, it's not an issue, right? You don't even need the export file. But if you have a hard LPAR boundary with no shared DASD, we give you the ability to migrate it to an export file, NDM it, FTP it over to the other side, and then you can use Configuration Manager on that side to import and automatically register the change package. And again, it will do transformation on the resource definitions as needed. Now, the nice thing about doing everything in a package is all changes are logged to a journal file. You can back out the entire change package. You can recover individual resources. You can view the resource definition histories on the screen itself. So you have the ability by the package itself to back out everything you've done, which means you might need to reinstall the resource definitions, right? You know how some of the definitions are a little bit more complicated to back out. We can handle it all, right? So we can actually back out the entire package as one shot. Now, today I'm hearing more and more about audit compliance. People want to know everything that's changed in their system by everybody who's made the change. Where was the initial change made? Who made it? What is it that they actually changed? When did they make the change, right? And, you know, if you keep in manual records, sometimes they're not always updated, needless to say. With CICS Configuration Manager, you already saw that I have a history of every change that was made. But I have more than just a history of every change that was made to a resource definition. This is just a copy of the Explorer screen, right? So everything you saw I could do via the ISPF interface, I can also do via the Explorer. And you can actually see an example where they're looking at a particular date and time, a resource name, the type of resource, and what in that resource was changed. So you could see a TWA size that was changed from 0 to 100. What's more is you can actually get a history of everything that's changed by individual users. So I'm just going to jump to that for a second and go back out. I went in before through option 2, which is generally used to manage CICS resources. Anything you want to do with a change package is option 3, but anything you want to do with reporting is option 4. One of the cool things you can do in terms of reporting is you can actually edit multiple configurations and compare them side by side to each other. So we can do a side-by-side comparison. There was a picture example in the presentation earlier of that. But one of the things I like is a list of changes to resource definitions and data. So I can go into option 3. And from option 3, if I put in the right date and time, and I'm going to leave the from date as 11/14/2018, but I'm going to change the date to today's date, which I know you're all going to tell me is 3/5, but because this region runs in Australia, it's a day later. And so you can see I'm now looking from 11/14/2018 all the way to 3/6/2019. I can pick a particular configuration that I want to see, a particular context if it's CPSM, a CSD file, any of the commands you issued, the change package, and I can scan all the way down to user ID. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look for everything, and hopefully it's not a lot of stuff. There's a little warning there because it's a long period of time. And you could see I've done some work over the days on various different resources at various different times. So you can actually see a whole list of changes. You can see the one that I was working with today. I made a copy of the program, I updated it, I altered it, right? And at any time, I can actually go down and take a look and see who made the change and what the change was. So it takes me right into the history record for this, which at the bottom I can actually see who's made this change, right? Now, again, if I hit PF11, it'll actually tell me the function that they used, the change time and date, and who actually did the work. So you can actually see from the beginning of time who's made the changes. And if you're really clever about it, maybe you did some work today and you messed some stuff up. These are all the changes I've made since that time. And you can see it's only a couple of changes that I've done. I can go down here and I could literally put a slash next to any of these, and I can go back and recover from that change, right? And so I had one customer who was using the product who actually called me up frantic because they accidentally issued one of these change all commands, right, where you can actually alter everything on a page. And they were worried because they were afraid they just deleted like 500 resources. And they know they had a backup, but they're not sure if it was from last night or from a month ago. Oh my God, what do I do? And I said, no, let's just go back in here, find everything you've done in the last hour, and just do a recover asterisk on the top line, which will allow you to recover all the changes. Okay. So again, I've shown you this screen already. So this was just the example that matches the one before here that is showing you the TWA size was changed from 0 to 100, right? Okay. Now, I know nobody ever likes to do cleanup and analysis, and even if we would want to do some cleanup or analysis, we wish we had the time to actually do it, that somebody actually gave us some time to do the work. So nonetheless, you might have an issue where, I don't know, you have some orphan groups, which are just groups unrelated to any list. You could have duplicate definitions. They have the same name, but different attribute values, obviously in different groups, otherwise it wouldn't work. Or you have redundant definitions, right, where you have the same attribute values and different names. How do I find a needle in a haystack? I want to know all the pay files using LSR pool ID 1, all programs using data location below. So this is showing you the Explorer interface. And so this is the CICS Configuration Manager plugin to the Explorer. And at the top of the page, he's looking at a particular configuration called CSD AOR6. He's done a right mouse click, he's gone down to cleanup, and he's shown the orphan groups which appear on the right hand side in the center frame. Now, rather just show you another example since we're on the page, you hit option 5 for orphan groups, and you pick the CSD you want to look at, and you say, show me all the orphan groups. How long would it take you, now again, you can ignore the DFH ones, but how long would it take you to find all these groups that exist, but they're not in any list? Some of them have dates of 2006, as you can see. So you could make a decision, none of these groups are in any lists, right? You can also go back a page, and maybe you want matching names. See if we have any of these. Yeah, let's get rid of the filter here. So there you go. I've got a program CCV AADD in this group and in this group. And actually, this is the CICS Configuration Manager itself. So I'm wondering, have they made any changes to this definition between the two different releases? And the answer is nope. Yeah. All you can see is the date and time change, but nothing else has changed. And this is the type of stuff that you could do if you wanted to know whether or not there were any differences between the definitions. Okay. So what about comparisons and exception analysis? Oh, I want to do one more thing. I want to do a little search for you guys just for the fun of it, right? One of the things that always irritated me when using CEDA, I'm going to go to the development CSD. I'm going to pull up every program in my system. And it could take a few minutes here or less, depending on how long it is and how much resource time I get. The idea here is I'm just pulling up all the program definitions in the CSD itself. And I got 2,884. Now I'm going to go up to the search line at the top. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to turn on search. Now, maybe I'm looking for programs with data location is below and the exec key is CICS, right? I have a slash there. I have and. I can do ORs, and these are all promptable values. So I could literally go in here, hit PF4, and it'll give me a bunch of choices to what I want to search for, what the operation I could search for is, and then finally, what the possible values are, right? So I'm going to hit PF3. Now, you'll notice it only left me with 37, so it excluded a whole slew of rows that didn't fit that criteria. But what it also did up on the right-hand side was it added a more, greater than, and less than sign, which means I can hit PF11. And by hitting PF11, I can see right here that I have data location below and exec key CICS. And so it'll actually show me information that I wouldn't otherwise see. So another example of this, shouldn't have gone out. Let's do it again. So I'm going to show you one other thing that I've used this for. You could search. I probably shouldn't have searched through everything because I don't want to make the change everywhere. So let me think about this. Well, let me show you another search first. One other thing I can do in search is I can go down here. I'm going to turn this off. I'm going to go and do data location not equal to any. Yeah, let's see that. Which means the data location is something other than any. Now, if you guys don't know this, at CICS TS 5.4, they changed data location to be any from below. But by default, it's all below. So all these programs are defined with below. Now, I'm just going to do something, but I'm not going to run it because I'll get yelled at for this. So let's just say you had a smaller list. This is 2,000 resources. I wouldn't want to do it to 2,000 resources that don't belong to me. So I'm going to put in demo group 1. And of course, all of my resources in there are okay. So let me go back to the search. And I'm going to change my search criteria to, let's do this. Let's do language equal, oops. Now, you can see that it gave me all the languages back now in the column there. Now watch this. I could do alter asterisk. Hit enter. And if I wanted to, I can make all the languages COBOL. Now, I'm not going to do it, right, because I don't want to mess up my system. But if I wanted to do a group alter at this point, I could do it all from just a couple of keystrokes, right? I don't have to edit each and every definition, right? So I'm just going to back out of that so I don't mess it up. Okay? Just gives you an idea of the types of stuff you can do. We also have, again, comparison and exception analysis. So you'll see you can do side-by-side comparisons. I did it of resources, but you can do side-by-side comparisons of lists and groups. And you can compare across CSDs, and you can use our fancy checksum value, which will show you whether a resource compares equally to another resource without actually looking inside the resource. Basically, a checksum is a hexadecimal value. We take all the attributes and compress it into a hexadecimal unique number. And if two resource definitions match the same, their hex number would be the same. And so you could see an example here where he's actually doing a comparison and an exception analysis, and he's comparing two groups to one another, and he's trying to figure out within those two groups what the differences are, right? Okay. So here's something else that's kind of new. And I'll do, if I have time at the end, a comparison of two different groups because it's kind of cool. You can compare groups. It tells you what's missing. It tells you resources that are different between each other. But let's hold that off till I finish this. So we have cold start analysis. Basically, it allows you to compare an in-memory copy of a CICS region that's running to its future start as cold. Right? We run into this all the time. You can run regions 24/7, and who knows, maybe you dynamically installed a group, you forgot to add it to a list, you don't remember because it was almost a month ago, and then the region comes up cold, and boom, all the resources are missing or changed, right? Well, cold start analysis, what it does is it allows you to compare two CSDs to one another, a CSD to a running system, two running regions to one another, right? A running region to a CPSM repository and so on, right? And it'll identify what's new, what's missing, right? And then some other types of errors that can occur, sorry. So here's an example, right? So we did a cold start analysis, and it showed us that a particular resource definition was missing, right? So you could see at the top, actually it's a couple of resource definitions, and it's missing from the runtime CICS Configuration Manager, right? So we know that the CSD has two additional resources that the runtime does not have. Or there's one in the middle which says different, right? So you can see there's a mismatch there on a particular connection definition where the access method is IRC within the region, and the candidate is going to have the access method as cross memory when it comes up. Or then another one of my favorites, a referential integrity check. It's just a fancy way to say you have a resource definition that relies on another one. We have a couple of those in life, right? You've got files that might need LSR pools. You have transactions that certainly might need profile definitions. You have terminals that have type terms that are required. And so effectively, what a referential integrity check says is, look, you're installing a file, but you don't have a definition for LSR pool 1. Yeah, that may or may not be a problem, but it's certainly there. Okay. So this is an example of the fact that you have a single point of control, right? What we did over on the left-hand side using the explorers, we picked up a particular CSD context, right? So it's a configuration manager context. We looked at it, and when we looked at all the resources, we found, if I can go back, sorry. Well, I gotta wait till it plays again. So what it did was we looked at a particular CSD and it told us how many of these different definitions were in there, and then we selected one of the particular groups and we're able to see all the resource definitions within the group, and then you can actually double click and see the actual resource definition in an editor, right? So what we also have is the concept of change packages that I mentioned earlier. All we're showing you on this page is that you can literally find any resource definition. So at the top, the user actually has a file definition displayed starting with an F asterisk. He found file A. He did a right mouse click. He added it to a change package. The change package name was known as dev-t-test, right? And then once it was in the change package, he could either ready it because it's already readied. We don't have to ready it. And he's issuing a migrate. And then over here on the left-hand box, he's actually installing it into a live CICS region. Okay? All from the Explorer. So now let's just mention a couple of new things that have come out with the product. This is at the latest release of the product, 5.4. We now have support for ZFS, right? Some of the resources that we define in the world of CICS live in a Unix system services directory, right? We don't actually create them using TSO, for example, mostly with the Explorer, right? Or you're using one of the programs that IBM provides to build web services, right? If you use DFH-LS to WS, WS to LS, you'll get a bind file, WS bind. Or it'll generate a WSDL for you. Or somebody else gave you a WSDL and you stuck it inside of a Unix system services directory. Or as you start to do Java development within CICS, you might have OSGI bundles, different kinds of bundles for policies or CICS in the cloud, right? Web service resource definitions. And today the problem is you got to migrate the resource definition from one environment to the other, but nobody handles moving the artifacts from one environment to the other. Okay. Well, what we added to the product was ZFS file support. Effectively, you identify a particular directory within ZFS as a CICS configuration, since we do everything via CICS configuration. And then if you have the structure of a file system, right, as the source and a structure of the file system as a target, we can use that and have that artifact migrated along with the resource definition as part of migrating resources within a package. Now, it doesn't mention it on this page, but I'll just add, it also provides for up to about 9 levels of backout. So we have the ability to actually do quite a bit of backout as we make these resource changes. Then comes something to do with audit. Now, this came up several years ago for customers that used CICS Configuration Manager. It turns out that if you make a change through the Configuration Manager, you saw that we have a history of every change that was ever made since the beginning of time, right? But then you get some customers that use DFH-CS DUP to update resource definitions. Well, when you run a batch job to a vSAM file, there's no knowledge to the CICS Configuration Manager that you made that change, right? You have the same problem if you go into CETA. If you actually go into CETA in a CICS region that's managed by CICS Configuration Manager, you get a warning, this is being managed by the Configuration Manager to remind you. But you could still just hit enter and go ahead and do the resource definition change through CETA. But if you make the change through CETA, then Configuration Manager will not be aware of the change. So what we've done so far is we've added CSDUP Audit Collection. And basically what that means is whether you use the Configuration Manager or DFH-CS-DUP to make the changes, it'll all be tracked by the Configuration Manager. And because it's tracked by the Configuration Manager, once you've made that change, you can also back it out through the Configuration Manager. Now, the way we kind of do this is we have a wrapper program that sits around DFH-CS-DUP. And it knows how to collect the information into a particular repository file that you can either dynamically add to the Configuration Manager if you wanted to talk directly to the Configuration Manager, or anytime somebody runs a CSDUP, it'll stick it in a file, and then once a week, once a month, you can actually send those changes off to the Configuration Manager so you can see everybody's that's made a particular change. So hopefully some of the demonstrations were useful. I do want to do one more demonstration since I have a couple of more minutes here, and I know that wrap up shouldn't take too long. But what I want to show you here is just an example where you can actually go into option 4 for reports. You can do option 1 for multiple configurations. You can go down to the development CSD and the test CSD. Yeah. And for anything starting with demo group asterisk, hit enter. And so you can see that these two groups by themselves don't show you anything. I'm going to go up to checksum. I'm going to put checksum on full. And right away, you can see the hexadecimal value provided in both these cases are different. So I know these two groups are different from each other. They're across two different CSDs. I'd like to know the differences between the two. So I put a CM and a CM next to it, and I hit enter. And I'm going to turn checksum on over here as well. Okay. Now, without looking at these resource definitions, the first page gives you everything. So if you hit PF8, you can see everything. But the way I like to do it is you hit PF11, because the first screen will show you everything that's missing. So it's basically showing you what's missing in demo test that lives in demo development. And you can page through this, and you can see it's a number of programs and some files. Then what you can do is you can hit PF11 again, and it'll just show you the resource definitions that have changed. You can see the checksum values do not match. And so what you can do down here is you can actually do a CM on this side and a CM on that side, and you can do a side-by-side comparison and see why the resource definition language in one environment does not match the resource definition on the other side, okay? So that just shows you an example of that, okay? So that takes me to the conclusion of my presentation. Are there any questions?
It would give people a couple of minutes to type in any questions.
Sure.
Just waiting. Okay. Okay, what I'll do then is sort of take back control and start moving things forward, and then if any come in, we can pick up on them. Okay. Oh, here's something now. Just come up. Alan Burstler says, is Explorer used for management?
Yes. You can use either the CICS Explorer with the CICS Configuration Manager plugin, or you can use the ISPF panel interface. I didn't bring up the Explorer, but there are some screenshots that you can see. So you can actually use the CICS Explorer to do what I did through the ISPF panels.
Okay, thank you. You got any more? Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm going to say thank you very much, Ezreal. If anyone does come up with a question in the next sort of few seconds, I'll suddenly switch back and go back to you. So let me say thank you very much. And as usual, can you assume that you're getting a virtual round of applause from the virtual user group? So thank you very much. I have got a few things to run over. In terms of news, you'll see that IBM's announced the IBM Z Open Unit Test, which is an automated unit testing tool for batch and CICS programs. IBM Z Open Unit Test works in conjunction with, surprise, surprise, IBM Z Open Development to create continuous development testing in delivery environments. Articles then, we've got 4, I think. So we've got JSON Web Tokens, now supported in CICS. That's by Eric Fan, and that's on CICS Dev Center. We've got a couple of these OSGI ones. OSGI Demystified 5.2, Declarative Services, a tutorial, and OSG Demystified 5.1, Declarative Services, a tutorial. And they're by Alexander D. Brown, again on Dev Center. And finally, we've got Getting Started with Node.js in CICS by Mark Cocker on CICS Dev Center. And that announcement and these articles, there's links to them from our website, so you can find them easily. Yeah, as always, can I ask for feedback about this meeting? This will probably be the last time that we use GoToMeeting. I think Rocket Software are encouraging us to move across to WebEx, so future ones will use WebEx. Again, you can email your comments to me. My address is on screen, or you can use the Contact Us webpage on our website. So, what's coming soon? 14th of May, we've got Tom Dunlap back. He's talking about CICS/MQ interface this time. And then the meeting after that, oh, why does it say the 5th of March? That should say 19th of July. So 9th of July. And we've got Colin Pierce, and he's going to be talking about how to solve CICS NQ problems. Always popular speaker, both of them. So just a reminder, you can keep up to date with what's happening in the world of CICS and on the virtual CICS user group website by following us on Facebook and Twitter, and by joining the virtual CICS group on LinkedIn. And the URLs to all of those are on screen. They're on the front page of our website. Yes, everyone likes likes, so if you can go to the Facebook page and like them. And if you're a tweeter or Instagrammer or even a Facebooker, the hashtag to use is hashtag virtual CICS. Okay, that's all for this meeting of the virtual CICS user group. Can I thank you all for attending? I must also thank Rocket Software who sponsor this user group and make these meetings possible. And of course, I'd particularly like to thank Ezreal Gross for today's presentation. So
Thank you.
That's it. Thank you all very much for joining the meeting. And I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday, the 14th of May. So thanks very much and goodbye.
Bye.